Alright, so Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, nicknamed Battle of Winterfell, but actually called The Long Night, has finally arrived, and it's garnered a lot of controversy. So let's get into it. First on the agenda, elephant in the room, which is the lighting. People are saying kind of dark, kind of murky, can't really tell what's going on. Blame it on a few issues, one of which is just a 75-day filming period. The cast and crew went to a location and they shot it using all natural light, which is a pretty insane choice for such a big episode such as this. I do think they took a lot of risk, some that paid off, some that didn't, but I do think even if you're on the negative side of this whole situation, you kind of gotta appreciate the craft that went into this and the dedication to realism and all the cast and crew doing something like this for your entertainment, creating the longest sustained battle sequence in media. I'm pretty sure in at least film and TV. So that I feel like you gotta appreciate that on its own level. The other thing people are talking about is HBO's compression. Slate has a good article talking about it that I'll link down below. But basically it's that, yes, digital cameras do capture low light footage better than, shooting on film does. But, one, you have to translate that to an HD TV, which is worse at handling dark stuff than the old tube TVs. And then HBO is taking that compressed footage, compressing it even more to, put it on the internet to waste as little bandwidth as possible. And so, depending on what your setup is, you just sort of get a not too clear image. As for me, I have a 1080p TV, nothing too fancy, not super new or anything, but for me it looked fine. Not like amazing. I think a lot of it just comes down to quality of vision. I wear glasses, so that's something. But I do think there's a little hyperbole that's coming with this. People saying the cinematography was bad are being insane. Here's a tweet that proves that wrong, knocks that out of the water. And some people are saying you gotta adjust your TV, turn the brightness up. You shouldn't have to do that kind of work just to watch an episode of television. I think that's kind of the whole point of television. It's supposed to be convenient, right in front of your face, so you translate those images to your eye holes. I don't think that amount of effort should be necessary. But if you're one of those people who are like, I'm going to open the window, I'm going to turn on all the lights in my house on, then I don't know how you come this far watching stuff on this bright screen. So, I had all the lights off, I did my job there. Didn't save all of it, certain characters, I was like, who is that? I couldn't quite make out everything, but overall it was fine. It wasn't like completely incomprehensible. But yeah, I understand some of the complaints, but I do think people are exaggerating a bit. And then, there's story details I want to get into that people also have problems with. So one, let's just talk about sort of how this battle played out. I do think this is an interesting episode when you compare it to this director's previous work, which I think he's only directed 2 episodes before, both of which were in Season 6. And the big one is the Battle of the Bastards, which is definitely one of the greatest episodes of Game of Thrones, I think. But the thing with that episode is that it is, it's not even one of the more meaningful, battles in Game of Thrones history or anything. But just the way it played out was definitely, it was huge, It was a very expertly choreographed, it was clearly well thought out. It was a clean sort of battle. Very, meticulously crafted, well shot. and all that. And, that's both a compliment to that episode, but I do think this episode may be a tad bit more realistic in that, it wasn't too carefully thought out in this situation. It was at night. They were fighting, beings who are very unpredictable. They're coming at them in a swarm. There's no battle formation. What are you going to do? And they're fighting with Dothraki this time. One of the first things you see, which was actually a very good use of the dark lighting. The Dothraki have swords that are lit on fire, and they're, charging there to take care of them, and you just sort of hear them less and less, and then the fire just fizzles out, which was a very interesting visual flair. I really enjoyed that moment, and it just set up the stakes for this episode. A lot of fighting wasn't too clean, but I just think that sort of represents this sort of conflict, So, I thought it fit the episode pretty well, but at the same time, you gotta think about entertainment. This certainly isn't more entertaining to watch than the Battle of the Bastards. And I do think it was weird you had that whole conversation with Jaime and Brienne. It was like, I'll serve unto you, blah, blah, blah. And then you just don't get a lot. You don't see a lot from those characters. There's not really that much leadership in this episode to speak of. And most of which I enjoyed in this episode was the stuff that was going outside of the main battlefield. Everything with Arya was amazing. Seeing Theon sacrifice himself was heartbreaking, but very, very nice. Good payoff. Cersei and Jorah, that was quite sad as well. A lot of sacrifice. All the dragon stuff, that was very cool. But yeah, Arya, sneaking off into one of the Winterfell buildings, seeing some of the conversation that was going down the crypts, sort of seeing their guilt and not helping out, and sort of realizing they're kind of weak. I do think it's kind of funny that Tyrion is like, I'm a fighter, I fought in this battle. And it's like, if I recall, you got immediately knocked out, and you were mostly not really fighting, you were just ordering people around. So I was like, Tyrion, you're a great character, I love you, yeah, but you're not that great of a fighter. What was weird is that Samwell survived. I'm sorry, but as much as the episode was fairly realistic, he probably would have dropped dead within the first few minutes, if we're being real. I mean, Samwell left the Night's Watch so he could study books. I don't think he needed to be out there, and it didn't make a lot of sense for him to be out there either. Speaking of things that don't make sense, the Red Woman in this episode, it was nice to see her back. I love that moment where she lights all the swords. Very cool. Classic Game of Thrones moment. But it was weird. She returned after all this time, and she kills herself at the end. She takes off that, necklace, choker, or whatever you want to call it. And then she just dies. She turns an old woman. She dies, slumps on the snow. Apparently because her entire purpose throughout the story was to get Arya to kill the Night King, which was a little bizarre. I think, Game of Thrones has still been good after George R. R. Martin's material ran out, but you can tell with characters that are supposed to be manipulating things behind the scenes, who it seems like they have one big plan, such as Littlefinger and such as the Red Woman. I think the writers of the show have a tough time figuring out what exactly to do with those people, especially because they're trying to wrap up things so quickly now that they're just sort of like, okay, well, we gotta, we'll just stick them in this episode. And I was like, would the Red Woman's purpose really be just defeat the Night King? What kind of connection does she have to the Night King? And I think the mystery is cool, but I kind of wish we had gotten to know more about her. I don't know, maybe if I rewatch the other episodes, I'll be like, oh, it makes sense. But at this present moment, I was a little disappointed with her death in this, like I was Littlefinger. Wasn't quite as infuriating, it was okay, but still. But the thing that wasn't okay, the thing that was amazing, I'm sorry, I don't care what you think, Arya in this episode, sneaking up behind some of the White Walkers, got to Night King. Night King turned around, choked her. I was very concerned for a second. Dropped the knife and was like, oh. And then she pulled a Rey, picked it up, stabbed him, just like Rey did in The Last Jedi. And I jumped up from my couch. I cheered. I clapped more than I did in Avengers Endgame, which I think does say something. So, to me, that was the absolute kicker of this episode. Really, the last 30 minutes of this episode are amazing, just emotionally. You just have all these tragedies going on. You have this, whoever did the score for this episode, like, props to you. This is top-notch work. Just this piano refrain they kept doing was amazing. And it was just a very sad episode. It wasn't a bombastic, crowd-pleasing type thing, which is why I think it took some risks. It was, you know, yeah, they won in the end, but like so many people died only for Arya to sort of get rid of the Night King. I mean, they just lost so much, and that means so much when you're going into the next episode, which is, you know, supposedly they're gonna try to march towards King Landing and, you know, get rid of Cersei, and obviously they're not gonna have as many men and women to do that. So, yeah, it was a very depressing end to the episode for sure. But overall, I very much enjoyed it. Maybe if I thought about it more, I would be like, oh, why did they do this and this? You know, why does this whole conflict just end in this one episode? Sort of disappointing, but honestly, I'm just appreciating on its own level. In the end, this is the episode we got, and I'm just sort of appreciating what they did with it, the craft that went into it, the risks they took. It was a very odd episode of Game of Thrones, and I think they're letting a lot of different people take the reins, you know, of this series. I've seen some people say Game of Thrones used to dodge cliches, and now it nods to them, but I'm honestly not sure this is true. I was fairly satisfied with this episode. It's certainly not the best episode of the season, and you know, it's not one of the better episodes in Game of Thrones or anything. I certainly prefer a lot of the other battle episodes, but I don't know. I'm honestly was and am more excited for what's happening in King's Landing than I was with this whole shebang. The whole thing with Cersei is a little confusing. I guess maybe it would have been more exciting and better if, you know, they had kind of joined in on that. I think you can kind of get stuck writing a character, and that's sort of what they did. But overall, again, I liked this episode for what it was. Comment down below, what did you think of it? Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, maybe better than the episode. Maybe you appreciated my insightful commentary. Subscribe and ring the bell if you want to check out the rest of my content for some reason. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye!